Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Today, we are delighted to have Michael and Sarah who will present at the seminar from CMIT. They have been super productive, so they are not presenting one but three projects, and we are delighted to hear from their lessons. We are planning, and then we're planning to have a 45 to 50 minutes presentation. Then Emilia Chenstrom is joining us, and we are delighted to have her to provide some comments and feedback about the presentation. Thanks, everyone. I won't take more time so that we can start immediately with the presentations.
All right. Just a minute, I'm sharing my screen. Good.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right. So can I start?
Please go ahead.
All right. Oh, so welcome, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. Mike Ndegwa, and today we are presenting 3 studies that we are conducting here at CMIT. And we are conducting these studies with a group of colleagues, as you can see from CMIT. And also we have collaborators, that's Hope and Anime from University of Illinois and University of Sussex. And the research question that we are working on as a team is testing innovations for adoption of newer and more adapted maize varieties. And as a way of motivating the presentation and the studies, so as we all know, climate change continues to adversely affect the productivity and well-being of farmers in this region, that's south of Sahara. And then farmers need to adapt to the changing production conditions. And organizations and even private companies continue to innovate and come up with ways of that could help farmers adapt to the changing production conditions. And one of them is a lot of advancements made in genetic innovations. And these genetic innovations can help farmers to adapt and achieve better yields, even with the current conditions the farmers are producing in. And a good example is we have quite a number of drought-tolerant maize varieties and pest and disease-resistant maize varieties, which have been released for this region as the south of Sahara. And also we, particularly in Kenya, where we are operating in and where we are conducting these studies from, we have a well-defined maize seed system with quite a number of seed companies, should be about 25 or more, and also with many agro dealers who are now the link between seed companies and farmers in terms of pushing varieties to farmers. And these seed companies continue to release new varieties, and some of them privately bred, others of the public sector. That's CMIT. We have our National Agriculture Research Organization here, and others continue to breed and release new varieties every year. So, and in this region also, and particularly in Kenya, the problem it's not mainly adoption or uptake of hybrids, but it's more of switching. So we see farmers, over 2/3 of farmers across agroecologies, they actually do go back to the shops to buy, or the agro dealers to buy improved varieties or hybrid varieties, maize varieties every season. And so adoption or accepting the hybrid technology is not the problem. But now the problem we see here is the question of farmers sticking to the old, to what they know. And as you can see from the graph in front of us, and this is primary data that we've collected from the baseline studies for these studies, the baseline survey for these studies. So old varieties dominate on the farm. And as you can see on your extreme left, that's the market share, and not really the market share. This is the percentage of the varieties that that farmers grew in the last 2 seasons, which can be called new or ultra new. And here we define new as ultra new as 0 to 5 years, of course, 1 to 5 years old since the year of release, and the new as 5 to 10 years. So below varieties that are 10 years and below since they were released, they only occupy 15% of the areas that the farmers grow. And then when you look at the old and ultra old, then they occupy 80% of the area, the maize area in the study areas that we cover. But on average, from the areas we are doing this study, we see a weighted average age of 18 years. Nationally, I think it's about 20 years old variety. And from this graph also, there are no major differences between men and women farmers. They all seems to be preferring old varieties over new ones. And also from the retail space, we see the same thing. So still old dominates there. So and you look below the first graph, a bit of background before you can look at the diagram. So the top 5 varieties have a substantial market share. That's about half of the market share in early maturity zones and about 2/3 of the market share in the intermediate and late maturity zones. So the top 5 have quite a huge market. But when you look at now the graph up there, the weighted average age of the top 5, again, they are not quite young varieties. So the green bar, that is the early maturity zone. Maybe that's where we see a bit of experimentation, a bit of farmer switching. So, but on average, you're talking of about 10 years old, the weighted average age. Then when you look at the other bars, that is the intermediate maturity zones and the late maturity zones, they are actually 15, 17 years, but in a short rain season, maybe a bit younger, 2 years younger. But generally, you can see the top 5 occupy quite a huge market share. But again, you wouldn't call them really new varieties. And when you look at on your right, the second diagram there below that, a bit of background again. So new varieties here, we define new varieties as varieties released in the last 10 years. So, and approximately in the last 10 years, approximately in intermediate maturity zones, in early and intermediate maturity zones, about 20 varieties were released. That's an average of about 2 varieties per year. And in the late maturity zones, the highlands, about 12 varieties were released in the last 10 years. That's on average 1 variety per year. But when you look at, so that tells you there's no shortage of new varieties being released every now and then. When you look at now, you go to the retail space and look at the number, the market share of these new varieties, which are quite a number of them. Again, they have a very low market share. So that is around 16%. If you look at the on your extreme right, the totals. So that's about 16% for the early maturity zones. That's where we see a bit more of switching, experimentation, and all that. But when you look at the intermediate and late maturity zones, it's below 10%. And so that still means that we have new varieties out there, but they don't seem to hit the market as soon. And then we are then asking ourselves, why could this be the case? Why do farmers not switch? Why do they still prefer sticking to the old? And also now the next 2 slides are also from the baseline survey that we conducted for one of the studies that I'm about to present. So, but we got a series of questions that were seeking farmers' perception towards new varieties, and particularly in comparison to the old. And we see that around 58% of them perceive new varieties as more expensive to cultivate. So we're asking questions like what they think about the cost of the seed for the new, the cost of, the amount of fertilizer that you need, labor, and also care and attention. And they generally seem to think, and even protection against diseases and pests. And there's generally around 58% of them agree that new needs much more, demands much more from them than an old variety. Then again, for around 48% of them perceive new as more susceptible pre and post-harvest. So, and these are questions around what they think about new when it comes to disease resistance, pest resistance, and also post-harvest management. And they think new will be more susceptible than the old. And about half of them also think that if there were any quality issues with seed in the market, half of them think that actually that could be with the new varieties. And so generally, if there was an announcement, there are some varieties out there have issues, avoid them. Which is to say they'll avoid the new one and go for what they know. And of course, 50% means that it's quite a proportion of them. But also we have around 30% of them who think that that problem could be either with new or old. It's only that around 20% or so who strongly thought that problem could be with the old. And so it seems it disfavors the new. And again, some other questions now, we ask them, they also do not anticipate new varieties to outperform the old, and this particularly on consumer attributes. So things like taste, things like density, things like the commodity prices, and all that. So they seem to think new does not outperform the old on that. And again, on yield also, and I'm about to show a slide that explains this a bit more. So they expect very little gain yield in terms of yields by shifting from an old, well-known familiar variety to a new variety. So if you look at this graph, I think it's a bit more expounding of what I just said. So we can for now concentrate on good season. So we ask them if you are to shift from local non-hybrid variety and recycled variety to a hybrid variety, what do you expect in terms of yield gain? And they indicate on average 60% yield gain. So shifting from local non-hybrid to a hybrid, they seem to quite expect a huge improvement in terms of yield. But again, now when you ask them, what about shifting from what you grow, what you know, what is familiar, hybrid, particularly, to another newly released hybrid, and they don't seem to expect much from that shift. So it's only around 50%. And if you look now across, we ask these questions for a good season, a normal season, and a bad season. And if you look at those different season categories, the same thing. It's about 60% and above yield improvement expected from shifting to local to hybrid, but only less than 10% yield again expected from shifting to from older hybrids to newer ones. And so we're asking ourselves then what could the problem could be, and we see there's a problem in delivery of the new, that's a seed systems problem, and then also information at farm level, there could be an information gap. And in terms of delivery, we're asking ourselves who could be the ideal change agent here. And we see seed companies continue to offer what farmers demand. And of course, every year now we've seen this, seed companies are still releasing varieties, but also they have a business and a portfolio to also protect, yeah? So they seem also to continue, producing and providing farmers with what they demand. And here farmers particularly demand what they have grown, experienced, and they believe it's good. And these tend to be charismatic brands, charismatic products, which are not always well adapted, not the best, but seed companies continue to. Some of the seed companies, and especially the domestic ones, have budget constraints, marketing budget constraints to push newer products out there. And so then if they already have a product that is a charismatic brand or a well-known, absorbed variety in the market, and they're struggling budget ways to push something new, then they will be easier to keep, pushing what the farmers already know and they're demanding for. So we also have agro dealers, and we have quite a number, a huge network of them in the country, who link the seed companies with the farmers. And again, they too are in business and would stock what is demanded by most, which is most demanded. And then also we see in terms of our public extension, there's no incentive to promote what's new, but also it pretty much dysfunctional, their capacity constraint. So and then we think then marketing and information intervention that target farmers could drive the change. The farmers could be the change agents that maybe we could be looking for here. So, but targeting them, whether directly or indirectly with marketing and information intervention, could be a promising approach. So, but again, when it comes to that level, farm level, the farmers, there are information gaps. For example, which varieties are new and fit for farmers' conditions. I think that, just introducing a new variety, farmers already know what they grow, and over time they have selected what works for them. So now knowing which is new and not just new, it's fit for my condition, then that could be an information gap there. Also, who has these new varieties? But also that another huge gap that we see is the question of is new really better? So, and in the absence of such objective information, I know in some context, I think farmers are supported with that. They're continually given information on the performance of different varieties, and they're left to choose. So we seem to be lacking that. And then we can rely on seeing is believing. And then in the absence of such information, it then would make sense to have farmers be the experimenters themselves. And when they generate information, then they're able to utilize the information, maybe change behavior based on what information they have generated themselves. But again, they would be disseminators of such information. They could share with the neighbors or village mates. And then based on that background just shared, so we set up 3 randomized control trials to evaluate alternative ways of encouraging farmers to test new maize varieties. And you'll notice it's not to encourage them to just shift, because you can do a lot of efforts to help farmers shift to something and then they stick there. So the idea here is to encourage them to test and maybe build a culture of experimentation. So, and the first experiment, which I'll be presenting in the next few seconds, we are asking ourselves whether trial hosts, are they effective in sharing information that encourages varietal testing and switching among villagers. And that was the host that traditional people use, or seed companies or even organizations set up trials in villages, and you have hosts. How can they be, how can we make them or that approach be more effective in generating information and also disseminating information that could encourage continued testing and eventual switching to newer varieties. So the other 2 studies, my colleague Sarah will be presenting. So those ones are implemented at point of sale. And the question is, can farmers' seed choices be influenced at the point of sale? And the first experiment is looking at incentivizing agro dealers or the retailers of these varieties or these products to promote newer varieties. And the second one then is how we can use information and price discounts to encourage farmers to buy newer varieties, to encourage them to consider newer varieties. So on to the first experiment. So then I'll trial host effective in sharing information that encourages varietal testing and switching among village mates. Here, we implemented an RCT, as I just mentioned, to evaluate how to facilitate village-level experimentation and learning about new seed varieties by farmers, and village level that already is to indicate that it's a cluster-level randomization, and the clusters here are villages. So, and the study tests 2 ways to facilitate social learning and information spillover. That's what we are leveraging on. Have a few experimenting or testing varieties, but again, targeting a wider audience. And so we're looking for leveraging on social learning and information spillovers. We are testing how to facilitate that through providing incentives to farmers for experimentation and dissemination, and then varying the share of village farmers who receive the new seed. And for this particular study, we are using trial packs where we gave randomly selected farmers within villages half a kg of new varieties, maize varieties to plant. So we want to see whether that share, we vary the share or the proportion of villagers or households who are hosting these trials. And also we give incentives to one of the treatment and then we don't give the others, and we are just about to look at the design. So the main objective is to establish how exposure and incentives to implement with new varieties affect their awareness and knowledge about new varieties. And also we want to see how that would lead to experimentation with new varieties. And I said again, it's building a culture of experimentation, not pushing a varieties one time. But also we want to see the objective is how the exposure and incentives to experimental varieties, where that could lead to adoption of newer varieties. And that is the eventual varietal turnover, which is quite a high order outcome. For the design of this study, so we have 3 treatment arms and a control group. So we have 4 experimental groups. And I said we are testing 2 things here. That's saturation of experimenters in a village, but also incentivizing the hosts or the villagers who are setting up the trials, see whether they can be able to pass over that information to others. So we have low saturation with 10% of households in a village and they're randomly selected. Then we give them trial packs of half a kg. Then we also have the second treatment, which is low saturation, but now combined with incentives. And for incentives, you are giving about 1,500, which is roughly equivalent to the 3 days of labor or casual labor in the villages. And then the third treatment is now where we vary the saturation, then the scale or the share of farmers in a village who are hosting the trials. And there we have 35% of them. And of course, we have a control group. So the data and the study areas. So we have conducted a baseline household survey, and some of the data I presented up there is coming from this survey with a sample size of 4,160 farmers. And then the interventions, we have already done the intervention from last season, which included trial packs distribution, monitoring the seasons, and distribution of incentives, which were given at 3 intervals of equal amounts. And then midline survey that we implemented this in the March season. So we are following up twice. We have an intermediate follow-up, which is midline survey, which is a season later, and it's starting next month. And you realize in these regions, we have 2 seasons per year. And so we'd also be interested to follow up a year later. So that also we track a similar season as the season that we did the implementation. So we are doing a and a second follow-up, the end line, next year around May, June. So the research area, we are conducting this in 4 counties in Kenya, as Embu, Kirinyaga, Vihiga, and Busia, which were purposely selected. And then we selected 208 villages, which are equally distributed across the counties. So the villages were randomly selected, a list of all villages in those counties, and then randomly selecting, I think, 52 per village. And then out of the 208 villages, we randomly assigned 52 to each experimental group, that is control, then T1, T1, T2, and T3. And again, this is cluster level randomization. So the randomization is happening, the treatment is happening at village level. So the main outcomes that we are looking or we are tracking and observing, it's adherence to experimental recommendations or the experimental protocol. This is particularly for the trial hosts in the treated villages. This can be done in control villages, and also these adherence also includes their dissemination efforts. We are measuring that. So we're also looking at willingness to experiment with new varieties, and this one we are observing both the hosts that directly treated and the neighbors who are supposed to benefit through social learning and spillovers. We're also looking at perceptions. I already presented the perception they already have about new. So we're also tracking whether there will be a change of perceptions towards new. And that is on performance, quality, and production cost, as I said up there. So we want to see whether there will be a change about that. And they're also looking at the awareness and exposure to the experimental varieties used in this study. So we are using 4 varieties, but a farmer was being presented with only 2 to select one. At the end of the day, a farmer is hosting one, but they were presented with 2 to select one. But there are 4 because of we are in different region, Western and Eastern region. So we have 2 varieties for Eastern region and 2 for Western region. A farmer presented with 2 to select one. So you also want to see the awareness and exposure to those particular varieties. But ultimately, we would also want to see whether these interventions would lead to varietal switching. That's from old to newer varieties. And here we are looking for proportion of planted varieties that are new, proportion of maize area cultivated with new varieties, but also weighted average age of varieties planted by the household. And this one is collected at parcel level. And as I said, this is ongoing work. We've not done the follow-up survey. We are doing the first one next month and the other one around May, June next year. So presenting more of the design and the methods. So for the analysis, so we have 4 main hypotheses, and I think I've alluded to that. So the first one is looking at the adherence or to what level the hosts followed the recommendations, and also to what level, how much effort do they make to disseminate information to their village mates. And we're using the regression equation down there. So, and as you can note, there is no control here. There's more testing. We are testing whether the treatment 2 and treatment 3 are leading to any benefit compared to treatment 1. The most basic treatment, did the treatment 2 and treatment 2 perform better than treatment 1? So we're interested in beta 1 and beta 2 here. So and you go to the second hypothesis, the intervention will lead to improvements across the target outcomes among the treatment groups. So the outcomes I presented up there, the first one is particularly for the host, the other it's both directly treated, the host and the non-host. And here we want to see, we are here just testing whether our treatments are actually effective, whether they're leading to any impact. So, and here in this equation, we are interested in beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3. So, and that is comparing treatment 1, 2, and 3 to the control group. And then when you go to the third hypothesis, so the outcomes will differ or should differ across the first treatment arm and the other 2 treatment arms. And here we then are going to compare the second treatment and the third treatment. We compare that to treatment 1. And as I said, they are heavier treatments, so to say goods, heavier treatments. So we'd expect them to have a higher impact there, or the outcomes should be stronger there. And so we are comparing T2, T3 to T1. And the last hypothesis that outcomes will differ across treatment 2 and treatment 3. But for this one, we don't have a priori expectation for now, or for the direction of the differential effects. Whether treatment 1, treatment 2 or 3 is which one is stronger. So that's something we want to assess. So we are testing at B1, and it should be beta 2, not 1. So here we are testing beta 1 is equal to beta 3. And the idea here is then going beyond this. First of all, we see which one is more effective in terms of achieving the desired impact. But again, we go beyond and look at the cost of implementation of either. so that we're able to look at what is more cost effective or cost efficient. And so here again, we compare the betas. Then in terms of way forward or the next steps for this, so the highlighted, the one that is the parts that have highlighted with the red marker. So they are past all the other activities or the other stages we have achieved so far, we've implemented so far. So we are going to the field next month to do a midline survey, and that's a season later, which is different from the season of implementation. But again, we'll go again next year around May, April, June, and that is after farmers have already made the seed choices and planted and settled. And again, now we'll go back and do a whole year evaluation of the outcomes that we are interested in. And so we'll have an net-like survey next year. But then from there, we're able to analyze the data and assess the impact or the effectiveness of our intervention. And thanks. I'll hand over to my colleague, Sarah.
So, Mike, thank you for the presentation. So do you want me to share my screen and stop sharing?
Yeah.
Or you want to move the screen? Okay.
Share.
Okay, just a minute. All right, so thanks, Mike, and hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, so I'll be presenting on 2 experiments as on that were implemented at the point of sale. And just to mention that we have some impact results for these studies. So I'm also going to be touching on some of the results that we are observing from these experiments. So I'm also going to keep it a bit short because of the time limitations, but do let me know in the chat if you need more clarification on any of these. So the question we're asking for these studies is whether, sorry, just a minute. Sorry, just a minute. Okay, here it is. So whether we can leverage the point of sale to push new varieties to farmers. And the reason we think point of sale is an opportunity to get farmers to try new varieties is because, as Mike mentioned, in this context, we have farmers who are already planting improved seed that they purchase every season. And so they come in at the point of sale every season. And so this can be potentially a cheaper way of reaching millions of farmers who are otherwise dispersed across wide areas. We also think in this context, again, we talked of, Mike talked of formal seed systems with already established distribution systems. So where we have seed companies working with hundreds of distributors, and these distributors linking up to smaller agro-dealers who then link up to farmers. So we also think that this system could also be leveraged to try and test some innovations around this that could help reach farmers with newer varieties. So we set up 2 studies that were actually implemented at the point of sale as farmers came in to buy seed in the March season. So in one of the studies, we targeted farmers through the agro-dealers. So we provided incentives to agro-dealers to see whether that would incentivize them to stock newer varieties and also actively engage with the farmers as they came in to buy seed. And this was informed based on some of the scoping work that we did, that we observed that agro-dealers are not very proactive in terms of engaging with farmers, but in the few instances where they engage with farmers, they are quite successful in terms of influencing farmers' seed choices. The other experiment is targeting the farmers directly as they came in to buy seed, in terms of giving them some general information and also some price discounts to try and draw their attention to other varieties at the shop, rather than just the usual way where they just come in knowing what they want. So like some sort of marketing interventions as they came in to buy seed to draw their attention to other choices available at the shop. So for the first experiments on agro-dealers, the main objective is to see whether agro-dealers can be incentivized to stock and also push newer varieties to farmers. It's an RCT that we set up this year. Again, working in the central and eastern regions of Kenya. We worked with a sample of 342 agro-dealers who are operating in 101 markets. So we did the randomization at the market level. And then for this work, we partnered with a large distributor who is based in the region, who actually provided us with a list of all the agro-dealers that they normally engage with. And the role of the distributor in this case was just to continue supplying the seed. So the incentive that we gave, as I'm going to explain, came from CIMIT, but the normal operations of ordering seed and the distributor delivering seed was played out by the distributor. So we started this year in the main season. So we started with a baseline survey among the agro-dealers. That was immediately followed by the announcement of the intervention. Immediately after the baseline survey, where we informed the agro-dealers of the intervention that we're hoping to carry out. Then that was followed by the usual seed stocking and sales by the agro-dealers in the season. And for those who qualified for the incentives, we paid for the incentives in the same season. In terms of follow-up data, we had a short survey with agro-dealers immediately after the seed sales season, that is in May. But also during the season, we sent a few research assistants who posted as farmers, and the idea was to see whether the incentives would make the agro-dealers engage more with the farmers. And also maybe to mention, we also, in addition to the mystery shoppers, we also intercepted a few farmers who are coming from these shops just to observe what they were buying. So in terms of the experimental design, I indicated that we assigned, so the randomization was done at the market level, and we have two experimental groups. We have a comparison group where the agro-dealers in the comparison group, after the baseline survey, we provided them with a list of all the varieties that were being offered by the distributor. And we added some basic information about these varieties. For example, the year of release, the price being offered by the agro-dealer. And then for the treatment group, which we are calling the incentive group, we gave them the same list, but then we drew their attention to 4 new varieties, and we invited them to select out of these 4 new varieties, to select 2 varieties for which they would get a gift or a monetary incentive of 50 shillings for every 2 kg packet of seed that they purchased through this specific distributor that we worked with. And in this case, 50 shillings is approximately 10% of the maize price. So our treatment, what we are trying to see is whether that incentive is would change the behavior of the agro-dealers in terms of the stocking, and also in terms of how they engage with the farmers, whether they were going to push newer varieties to farmers. So in terms of data, so just a quick description of the sample. So we find that, the sample of the agro-dealers that we are working with, we find that quite a majority of them are actually small shops selling directly to farmers, around 83%. And we also have around 15% who are selling to both farmers and other shops. Then in terms of the maize seed sales account for around 20%, so less than 20% actually of the total revenue, so not very important in terms of the business for the agro-dealers. And then we also find that most of the agro dealers are quite risk averse in terms of their investment decisions. So only around a third indicated that they would prefer high risk, high return options. Then in terms of the experience at baseline with these promoted varieties, we actually find around 90% of the agro dealers who are already aware of these promoted varieties, the 4 varieties that we worked with. And a high proportion, around 70%, had some sort of experience with these varieties, either through seeing it somewhere in a demo or in a neighbor's plot, or even getting feedback from the customers. But we find very few, around a third, 33%, stocking these, who stocked any of these variety, and they accounted for around 7% of their total stock at baseline. So they are aware, they have some level of experience, but the stocking is not still as much as we'd expect. Then we asked the agro dealers about their perceptions about newer varieties, and quite a majority, around over 50%, think that newer varieties on average perform better than older varieties. And also they believe that they can easily influence the choices of the farmers. Around 62% said that agro dealers can easily influence farmers' seed choice decisions. So I think this tells us that they think they can influence and they know these varieties, but they were not doing it as much based on their stocking levels at baseline of these varieties. So in terms of our estimation of the main effect of the incentive, this is the equation that we used. And our interest is on beta 1, which is the coefficient on the indicator on whether the agro dealer was assigned to either an incentive or a comparison group. And we cluster the standard errors at the market level because of the market level randomization. So our interest is testing whether beta 1 is 0. So in terms of the impact, so our main outcome at the agro dealer level that we measured is the stocking decisions of whether an agro dealer stocked any of the promoted varieties, how much of the promoted varieties they stocked, and the proportion of the total the proportion of the promoted varieties of the total stock, and also of the total sales. So here we have 2 samples. We've split our analysis into 2 samples. So we have a pooled sample of all the agro dealers in our study, but we also have another sample. So we realized that it's not all the agro dealers who bought through the distributor that we worked with, actually around a half of the sample. So both in the treatment and in the control group, we only have half of the agro dealers buying through the distributor. So we also try to split our analysis into the pooled sample and also this small sample. And maybe it's good to mention that we don't see, our treatment does not influence the likelihood of purchasing through this specific distributor. So in terms of our main outcome, we find that yes, the incentive increased the likelihood of stocking a promoted variety by around 11%, not significant for this pooled sample, but significant for the small sample that purchased through the project distributor. So this means, so for just to take a step back, so if the agro dealer purchased through another distributor, then they didn't qualify for the discount. So we only offered the discount to those that purchased through the distributor that we worked with. So in terms of the effects, so we find some impact also on the amounts and the proportion of the promoted varieties of the total stock and of the total sale, around 50% more in terms of sales relative to the mean of the control group. And if you look at, if you compare that with the average sales for the control group, which was around 991 kg, so the additional the incentive got an additional 69 kg on average and 39 kg at the median per agro dealer as a result of the incentive. So from the mystery shoppers data, the secret shoppers, and also from the farmers data. So the first column shows the results from the mystery shoppers data, where we sent, each agro dealer was visited 3 times by 3 different shoppers. And we find that agro dealers who are assigned to the incentive group or who are in the treatment group were more likely to recommend a promoted variety by around 12 percentage points compared to agro dealers who are who are assigned to the comparison group. And again, we find much stronger effect for the sample that purchased through the project distributor. So no significant effects for the farmer level outcomes. So here we intercepted farmers as they came out of shop and we recorded the variety that they purchased. So we don't find any significant effect for the pooled sample, but we do find farmers coming out of agro dealer shops that were treated were around 7 percentage points more likely to buy any of the promoted varieties. And we also have some effect on the extensive margin in terms of the amount of promoted varieties seed, the amount of seed of the promoted varieties that they were buying. So in other words, the incentive motivated the farmers the agro dealers to engage more with the farmers and try to push these promoted varieties among their clients. And then I show some results on the price. You know, we are reducing the cost of the seed for the agro dealers, so you'd expect part of that to be passed through to farmers in terms of reduced prices. But again, when we look at price data from the three data sources, so the self-reported data from the agro dealers, then the price reported by the mystery shoppers, and also the price reported by the farmers, we don't find any significant effect of our treatment for the 2 samples. And in any case, in some of these, it's positive and quite something. So yeah, just to mention that we don't see that pass through in terms of price to the maize farmers. So the last experiment where we targeted farmers directly with information and price discounts as they came in to buy seed. Again, we set up a small study this year in March season, where we sent field assistants outside the actual agro dealer's shop. And so they would intercept farmers as they came in to buy seed, seek for consent to participate in our study. So for those who consented, they were given a short survey, just asking them what they were planning to buy during that specific visit, and also collecting some basic demographics. Then after that, they would invite the farmer to randomly pick a raffle that would assign them to any of the 4 experimental groups. So we had a control group and 3 treatment groups. So for the treatment 1, we gave, so this was done through a video. So we made a video, we made an information treatment where we had a local actor act out, and the main information that was carried by the video, which was shown through a tablet. So an enumerator would invite a farmer to watch the video through a tablet. So the main information, that's why we are calling it general information. It's just inviting farmers, telling them what it means to have a new variety, you know, the breeding efforts that breeders continuously try to breed for changing production environments. Then these seed varieties are tested on station, they are tested on farm. Then after that, they go through the regulatory process. Like here in Kenya, they have to be tested by KEVIS. And so we just encouraged farmers to try because they are potentially better. So the main message was to encourage farmers to go try. And we mentioned 4 newly released varieties that were promising and encouraged farmers to try. Then for treatment 2, we gave the same information, but we also gave a 10% discount on the price of seed, and mentioned that this was also to encourage farmers to go try. In the last treatment, we gave a 25% discount. For the control group, we didn't mention anything, but they were also shown a video, but that didn't mention anything to do with maize or seed. It just showed fun facts about agriculture in Kenya. So maybe just quickly go through this. So this is some characteristics of a sample. So we find that quite a number, so around almost 60% were aware of any of the 4 varieties that we were working with, but a few had planted, 11% in the previous season, and only 34% had planned to purchase any of those varieties in that given visit. So in terms, this is of our estimations strategy. So we have the 3 treatment indicators. So our interest is to test beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3, whether they are equal to 0 each separately, comparing that with the control, and also test whether they are equal. So testing whether there is additional effect of the discount, the 10% discount and the 25% discount. So in terms of our main outcome, so the very first, so when the farmers were coming out, so after being shown the video, we allowed the farmer to go in, engage with the agro dealer, do their purchase, and then when they came out, we intercepted them again and recorded the variety that they purchased and the amount of seed that they purchased. So in terms of, we have 2 main outcomes that we are looking at for this. So whether a farmer purchased a variety and a promotion and the amount of promoted variety that they purchased, then we do find that even the general information alone had some modest effects in terms of increasing the likelihood of that a farmer purchased a variety and a promotion by around 14% relative to the control group. And also that and we also see some effect on the intensive margin in terms of the amount of seed of these promoted varieties. So not strongly, marginally significant, but there are some 19% increment relative to the mean of the control. So we find much stronger effects of the 10% discount, and again, stronger, the effect was strongest for the 25% discount, and all these are significantly different from the information on treatments. So we asked farmers that bought these varieties to tell us why they chose those varieties, and we find that a majority of farmers indicated that they would like to experiment. The first set of bars here, they would like to experiment with the varieties, and we find a higher proportion of farmers mentioning this in both the information group and the discount group. In terms of price, cheap, affordability, we don't see farmers mentioning that a lot. So the main reason that seemed to make farmers go for those varieties was wanting to go and trying them out in their farms. And we also find this being supported by, by the fact that we find farmers expanding in terms of the total number of varieties that they purchased. So, and we find this significant across all the treatments. So farmers who received the information and the discounts purchased more varieties compared to farmers who are in the control group, and that supports the case for farmers wanting to experiment, meanwhile still maintaining their old choices. So, okay, so to the end, so maybe a quick reaction to these results. We find that yes, in this study, in this context, we
excuse me, just your time, the 50 minutes that we had is over now. So if you could try to wrap up as briefly as you can, so we can switch to the comments.
Thanks. This is the last slide actually, so I should.
Perfect.
Yes, so we find some results when we measure the impact of our treatments immediately after the interventions, and that hopefully with time we can observe more, depending on, of course, how farmers learn about these varieties. And you can also imagine with the social learning and all that, the impact might be much stronger than what we find now, because we can have farmers sharing out this information with others in the village. So I think this was a positive finding. So, and we hope to find stronger effects in the future. Thank you. So we thank all our collaborators, our funders, and thanks to all for listening.
Wonderful. Let's switch directly to Emilia's comments before we open the floor for discussions.
All right, let me share my slides. And I think I think my internet is a little bit unstable, but so caller, if you can't hear me. I don't have, okay, great. I don't have a ton of slides, but I tend to talk enough to that will probably make up for it. Give me 1 second. There we go. So first of all, thanks so much to Mike and Sarah for sharing this. Obviously, a big reason that that I'm super excited about discussing this work is that this is really important. Of course, we all know, I mean, I think most of us are here because we know that the varieties that farmers adopt and the quality of those varieties, the quality of the seed that they purchase can have huge implications for food security, for as you mentioned, climate, adaptation, for yields, for socioeconomic outcomes, etc. Right? And so it's possible that my first slide may come across as somewhat critical, but it's really not. It's I want to preface that. So your motivation for this work in general is at least the way you set it up. I would say that the way you presented was a bit less focused on age of the varieties and a bit more focused on the match, on encouraging experimentation by farmers. And I think that's really, really important. Okay, so you set up the work by demonstrating, based on your baseline survey, that farmers tend to plant older varieties, agrovets tend to stock older varieties. And so the question then becomes, why don't farmers switch to all these newer varieties that are available in the market, right? So many varieties are coming online. People switch cell phones all the time. Why aren't they switching maize varieties, right? And I guess my question to you is, well, why should they, right? You haven't told me why they should. Okay, so there's a new cool thing. So my old Mugabe phone, right? Like the Nokia thing that never dies, it's still working. So why should I try one of these 200 new varieties that are basically, pose a lot of uncertainty, and I just don't, it's most of the information about them is coming from the seed company itself. How do I know that that's a reliable source of information? Even if it is a reliable source of information, how do I filter that based on all of my characteristics, right? So basically, the main point of my discussion, I'm not going to go into a lot of methodological detail because from what I could gather from the presentation, the slides that I got, I mean, these are really well-designed RCTs, right? My main question to you is going to be, are you asking the right question? And that sounds harsher than it is, because I know that at your core, you are asking the right question, but I think you could get a lot more nuance and a lot more traction out of these studies if you asked, instead of asking, how can we get farmers to adopt newer varieties, you asked, how can we get farmers to adopt varieties that are a better match for their growing conditions, okay? But coming back to this question of why should farmers switch versus why don't they switch, right? So you say in your baseline survey, farmers perceive varieties as more expensive to cultivate, which I assume is, either because they're more costly to purchase or because they need more fertilizer or they need herbicide, etc., right? They perceive them as more susceptible to pre and post harvest losses. They think they're more likely to have quality issues, and they don't really think that there's that much to gain. Okay. But then you don't actually convince me, at least based on your slides, and maybe you do in papers and you will in other places, but I need to be convinced as a reader of the work that the farmers are wrong when they say these things, right? So you need to tell me and your audience that these varieties are not more expensive to cultivate, that they're not more susceptible to pests and post-harvest losses, etc., and that they're not more likely to have quality issues, right? And you could probably do that with a bunch of the data that you have. So for example, you have your mystery shopping data. If your farmers go, like your enumerators go out and purchase varieties, you could test whether there are more germination rate issues in newer varieties versus old varieties, or maybe it's the other way around, right? And in fact, I probably have the data from other work to answer that, and I'm going to look into it. I just didn't have time for this, but basically, you set up this whole problem around a single dimension of seed characteristics, age, but you don't actually convince us that age summarizes in a useful way these different characteristics. And of course, I know I'm talking to CG system people and CIMMYT, and folks in the audience surely know a lot more about maize than I do, but we all know that productivity is a function of tons of different things, right? Disease resistance and months to maturity and standing power, drought tolerance, yield potential, pest resistance. Can they stand up to herbicide? What's the optimal plant density for, that's going to influence how much seed you need to purchase and how much you can get out of your 1 acre of land. And, then is the seed old? Do they germinate well? Grain quality, all these things. And you're boiling that down to age. And maybe that is a great characteristic. Maybe seed quality along all these different dimensions that I put up here and many more, maybe that is well summarized. Maybe it's all monotonically increasing in age. So, or decreasing, I guess, right? So that the newer the variety is, the better all of these characteristics are. But I don't think that's true, right? We have newer varieties that don't have as high. So, you take the varieties developed for the Rift Valley, maybe even, 10 years ago, those might have a much higher yield potential than a newer variety that's developed for SPIA or, whatever, some county near Lake Victoria at a lower altitude. But that variety might be much more drought tolerant, or it might mature faster, so it doesn't need as long of a growing season. That makes it a much better match for a farmer in SPIA than a variety developed 10 years ago in Rift Valley, but it has nothing to do with the age. It has to do with the suitability of that variety for the farmer and for the farmer's growing environment. And to my mind, that is a more subtle question, which of course makes it much more difficult to study. But if we as researchers aren't able to distill that, or aren't able to, write a model that allows us to predict which seed is better suited for which farmer, then how can we expect the farmer to solve that problem, right? Or the agrovet, etc. And so this is sort of my big challenge to you. And I don't expect it to be easy. And it's you know, I'm really taking your research and putting it a little bit on its head and tossing the question back to you and saying, okay, is it about age? Is this question about why aren't farmers adopting newer varieties, is that the right question, right? And so that's my big challenge to you, is can we ask that question in a more subtle way, right? Can we ask that question and add a bit more nuance and say, are farmers adopting the right seeds for their growing environment? Because I think that's really the question that we need to answer. And so I loved, so it's really important to think about the match, right, between farmer and variety. So you were much more careful about this in the presentation. And I loved, in experiment 1, when you presented now, Michael, you said, you talked about encouraging a culture of experimentation. And with that, I am 100% on board, right? I stand fully behind the idea that farmers need to actually both be encouraged and have the opportunity to experiment and to some degree learn about how to experiment, right? And how to get the right information from an experiment. Because if you have a bad draw of weather in one season, that makes it very difficult to then, learn about the varieties that you planted, or, if you apply fertilizer in a non-homogeneous way across your little experimental plots, that's also going to make learning much more difficult. So there's many different aspects to encouraging a culture of experimentation, but I think that is really gold. That's really, really important. The other thing that I love about the studies is how you use mystery shoppers. I think that's a really underutilized tool in this space, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from it. And so in terms of, I would sort of boil these three down to, getting information from your neighbors, getting information from your agro dealers, and getting information from researchers. And I think the one that, in a sense, actually I would almost caution, again, not against, but have more caveats about the information from agro dealers and information from researchers but for different reasons. So encouraging farmers to learn more from their neighbors, I think there's just nothing, well, not that nothing can go wrong, but it's sort of teaching farmers to learn, not telling them what to do, right? And I think that is the big, or the potential concern with experiments in the style of experiment 2 and experiment 3, where encouraging agro dealers to provide information to farmers, or to encourage them to purchase certain brands, can quite easily go wrong, right? If so we have some evidence, it's still quite tentative, so I don't want to hang my hat on it fully as of now, but we have some information from a recent experiment that shows that when mystery shoppers are sent into an agrovet, and they have sort of a role of asking for the cheapest variety, agro dealers will basically give them a variety that's very similar to what they tell researchers that they would recommend a smallholder farmer who, plants an acre of maize in the sort of nearby area. Whereas if we send a mystery shopper in to the same agro dealer and we ask them to say, hey, agro dealer, could you please recommend me a variety? Recommend me a maize variety that I should buy? The agro dealer will sell them a more expensive seed variety, right? So agro dealers actually know that they have a lot of information and a lot of power over their consumers. And so I think there's potential concerns with trying to use agro dealers as the main actors of change, or I forget the term you used, but yeah, the drivers of information diffusion, because they'll quickly realize that they have power and that they have the ability to sway consumers and they might steer them towards high markup varieties, or varieties where the seed company is giving them a cut, right, or a bonus or something. And similarly, but for different reasons, there's good reason to worry a little bit about encouraging farmers to do what the researchers tell them to do, right? And the reason for that is what I said, it's a really complicated problem. And maybe, you know, if you're quite certain that you're giving good advice, that's fine. But in a lot of cases, you know, if we're just giving advice based on the age of the maize variety, then we might be recommending the wrong variety, right? We might be steering farmers away from a variety that was well adapted, working well locally, towards a higher yielding variety that's going to collapse completely because there's a lot of Striga in the area, or, you know, whatever, right? And so I think it's just important to be a little humble, I guess, in terms of really laying out clearly what we know about the problem and what we don't know, and, you know, not putting the whole burden on the farmers and saying that they're not adopting, or they're not adopting in the way that we think they should. But there might be good reason for that, and so we should be more careful about. And you were much more careful in your presentation than your slides reveal. So, but yeah, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. Now you're hitting the end of your time.
That's it. Yeah.
That would leave a little bit of time for discussions.
Perfect. Yep. No,
I'm
wrap up? Pretty much just repeating myself at this point anyway. So I was just recapping my my conclusion. So I'm happy to open it up to the floor now. Thanks, Rashid.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Super insightful comments. Who wants to raise their hand? Please raise your hands if you have questions. Thank you, Jordan. Thanks. We understand those who need to drop off. Any question? Maybe I can jump in while people also can get inspired with more questions if you want. And tell me, do interrupt me if I miss a question, or even jump in if I just don't see the comments or hand. I think there is something. Emilia's main concern is something that I was also sharing when it was during the presentation. One is when they show all these beliefs from when you show all these beliefs from the farmers. Well, there is a wiseness of the crowd, and to some extent they have a fair amount of information. Some of them have tried, and so there is definitely some thoughts about how much they may be right when they say that the increment is maybe only about 5% on average. And in a world of heterogeneous returns, maybe depending on each one's conditions, could the situation partly be that among the previous varieties, they figured out what works for them? Let's say there are different varieties for different situations. They figured out what works for them. If I want to switch to the new ones, then I need to figure out which one of these new ones is the best one for me. And there is another, it's not just switching to any new one that's better. So I fully understand that there is something that is highly disturbing, that farmers are using varieties from 10, 20 years ago, because this means that any of the research that has been done in the last 10 to 20 years is almost useless, because some of them use the more recent ones. But it's disturbing, because then what's the point of this effort that we're doing, that we or you or the CG and other producers of these seeds are doing? That is highly disturbing. And of course, how will we have progress if the technological progress is not integrated? But there is a serious question about, from the farmer's perspective, is it just any switch to a new variety that's better? And eventually the obstacle could be finding out among these new ones which one I should use as a farmer in my conditions. So how much do you think that the intervention could help them experiment, and once they say, okay, now I want to try different of the new ones, is it just making them switch to the new variety that is promoted, or helping them switch and then starting experimenting among different new ones? I think here it's important to actually observe the details of the dynamics and are they switching then between different new ones until they find the new one, and how much, and there is a risk of switching to the wrong new one and at the end not getting much improvement compared to what they had. And
Yeah,
perhaps
exactly.
Michael and Sarah, how are you thinking about this issue?
All right. Thank you very much for those the good comments on the presentation. We greatly appreciate. And of course, that's why we are making this presentation at this moment in the process of implementing the studies. And as I said, we still have follow-ups. Even for Sarah studies, there are still some follow-ups to be done. So yeah, so these are the kind of comments we are looking for, and we are happy we get that. So, and I think quite a number of them, not really a rebuttal, but more accepting, and maybe some of them could be about pricing, and others maybe could be us thinking a little bit more, and some of them even thinking of informing our future studies. But a quick one, and I think Emilia, towards the end, the slide that is on the screen right now, she made a great summary of what is it that we are looking at. So and that's it. The studies we are talking about, it's more of encouraging farmers to be experimenting with varieties. So, and I think at some point I mentioned that we can maybe as researchers, and of course we are agnostic to any variety, any brand, so we might put a lot of effort in pushing a variety out there. Maybe unless it performs well, farmers like it, adopt it. Like already now, out of the 4, we already know, based on the region, we already know what farmers keep asking us, and every time we are forwarding those requests to seed companies who are referring them to the right agro dealers where they can get. So let's say then they move to that, and then they stick there, and years later, maybe it's not doing as good. So and then maybe there's a struggle out of the intervention. And so our interventions here is about, in the absence of objective information that is continuously generated, to help farmer make that decision, which variety to grow this season. Because the problem here, I think, it's which is my variety 10 years later. And of course, and Emilia said the production is a factor of many variables, but also these variables keep changing. Like we didn't have fall armyworm around 8 years back. We didn't have MLN some years back. And so these things are now have become part of the reality that the farmers have to deal with. And so now breeders continue then to breed as the conditions keep changing. And so the idea here is to encourage farmers to keep experimenting. And at the end of the day, out of that experimentation, they generate information for themselves, maybe disseminate to the others. Then based on that, then they are able to make decisions and choices as they go. So I agree. I already said on average, from the retail data that we collected, on average, we see like 2 or so varieties per year being released in specific agroecologies. But now that means, every year on top of all they have. And if you look at the code, the variety code that we have, it has tens of them. So also making that choice becomes a bit hard.
Or hundreds sometimes, right? If you really go into it, eh?
Pardon?
Sometimes it's even hundreds, right?
Yeah,
if you really want to list all the varieties, it's crazy.
There are many. And out of that, maybe half of them could be 10 years and below. So then rather than leave the farmer in that maze, and we don't have any institution that is doing continuous evaluation of these varieties, it's then encourage the farmers to be generating this information for themselves, make decisions, and maybe disseminate to their neighbors.
Michael, let me put the question even in a more naive way. How much do you have the belief? It seems like there is a little bit of a belief that switching from an old variety to any of the new one would be a substantial improvement. Do you have this belief, or do you think that or there is a good reason to understand why the farmers are lost, because they think that it's not any switch is better. They would still have to find what's better for their conditions and their constraints.
Sure.
So that could be part of the explanation.
Sure. Yeah, and maybe Sarah also could come in, but and my other colleagues. But I think there are 2 questions both of you have asked, which also we ask ourselves as we continue with this work. First of all, what Emilia started with, why switch? And then also the perception that we presented, are farmers really wrong? Would they be right in that? So I think that's also questions that we are asking ourselves. And that's why we're saying maybe then if they're able to generate information for themselves, and then rather than them just being perception, they could then seeing is believing, they say, then they could be able to interact with a variety for a season or two, then choose whether to continue with it or to drop it. And for this kind of intervention, I mean, it's also a great success, experimenting and dropping, saying this one doesn't work for me. I think there's success in it. And then in the process of that, maybe this also works for me. And so they're encouraging them then to continue generating that information, that also then maybe their perceptions can be based on, something that they have observed. But also, and I know Jordan has alluded to this, at least in Kenya, the process of releasing varieties is quite elaborate. And they go all the way. I mean, breeders, I think they do a series of evaluations, they select, but also that goes to KEFIS, and they do what we call National Performance Trials, NPT. And NPT, there are as many breeders, I mean, seed companies and other breeders bringing in their varieties, and they are set up against commercial checks that are popular, and they have a selection criteria. And so for a variety to go beyond NPT, then be released, it has to meet a particular thresholds in terms of performance. And so it's not anything that breeders breed that get released. I think also, I'm not very sure, but we could check with the breeders what the rate of passing, how the percentage of variety that goes to NPT that eventually gets released. I don't think it's even half. And so there's such an elaborate process of releasing and testing varieties to be released, which also maybe gives us some confidence that whatever is being released will be good. But also whether it's fit for farmers, specific farmers, I think it's something we need to keep evaluating. Maybe Sarah could have
Can I just add sorry, go ahead.
No, just go ahead.
No, I was just going to add a small tweak to that question, or to that discussion of the thresholds, because my understanding is that they're looking primarily at, so what clears the bar is primarily based on yield. But maybe now there's more nuance, but for example, I could have a drought tolerant variety that isn't necessarily a very high yielding variety, but it will withstand more low rain or shorter seasons, etc. Right? So there's also, you could imagine varieties that don't improve on the mean yield, but that improve other moments of the distribution, right? So reduce the variance of yield, or in the case of drought tolerance, get rid of the left tail or the really bad outcomes, etc. So of course, I mean, it's very hard to set a similar kind of qualification threshold for those kinds of characteristics, let alone all the other characteristics that farmers may wish to pay attention to. So sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, thanks. So as Mike said, and also this informed our treatments, especially for the information from the researchers. We were not pushing any specific varieties, just explaining to farmers and giving them an option of trying out. That's the best we can do for now, because I agree, we don't have that objective information about how these varieties perform under farmers' conditions. And this keeps on coming up. So we're also thinking of doing some work in the future to address that question. So it's in our radar. So for now, we work based on the data that we get from the on-farm trials that CIMMYT does, and also from the fact that these varieties have gone through an approval process by KEFIS, which is quite stringent, so as to speak. So yes, we acknowledge, and we are thinking about how to also answer that question in the coming studies. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Let's try to open the floor once again. Anyone else from the audience does have any additional question? No, I have more questions. I'm happy to jump in between as well. So two things, perhaps. I think you've mentioned essentially that these two dimensions of average yield and sort of this variance of how it performs in bad versus good conditions, and these are two key criteria. But you haven't, but we know that farmers' decisions could also be driven by taste or other factors, depending on whether it's targeting the markets, and if it's for the markets, it's more the market requirements. If it's for themselves, it could be taste and color or other factors like this. Is there any changes in these dimensions that could also be part of the story and part of the obstacles that would need to be addressed here? So, or let me put my question. So that's one. And the other one is you have a saturation design, but if I'm not wrong, I saw it's always the effect on the treated ones. And typically there is, if we care about saturation, it's essentially for focus on how much does this spread to the non-treated ones, because there is the idea that, well, if I have 10% versus 35% of my neighbors that are treated, that makes me more likely as a control to be for the spillovers, right? And you're interested in actually looking at the spillovers, given that you have a saturation design.
All right. I'm not very sure if I got the second question clearly, but I'll respond to the first and then I'll attempt to respond to the second, then you tell me if I got it clearly. So yeah, other traits, I think for the presentation, the slide that has those perceptions, it's more of a summary, but we have a host of questions that we used to reach there. So, and yes, we were asking them like consumer traits, things like taste, like the density, things like also the prices of the commodity. Do they think with a new and an old, which one is likely to grow better prices out there? So yeah, we had a number of questions that also are going beyond the field or the farm characteristics of yield and disease resistance and all that. So we have a number of them that we asked, and that's what we're seeing also. Even on those ones, I think they don't perceive them as outdoing the new. And actually, you know, it seems like quite a good percentage think the old is better on those ones, and like quite another substantial percentage think that they are the same. So, and then a number of them just think the new is better based on those ones. So yeah, we have a host of other perception criteria that we are using. And so, yeah, not very sure. Maybe please, you could come again on the second question. And no, I know we have Sarah, we have Hope here, so also feel free to come in here. Yes.
I hope as well. No, it was just, does someone want to answer, or should I clarify the question? It was just the idea that if you have a saturation design, you have 10% of the population treated versus 35% of the population treated. In most studies that I've seen with this kind of design, the most interesting question is whether the control group within these villages, the remaining 90 or 65%, how are they affected by the spillovers, and does the magnitude of the spillover really change within one group or the other? But, and maybe I'm wrong, but it's like you're not surveying the control group within the treated villages or within the treated
Yeah. All right. Yeah, we are surveying them. The way we designed the study within the treated villages, we have many farmers who got the trial packs, but we are only surveying a few of them. I think it's 4 per village, and we have power calculations. So this 4 per village multiplied by 208 village gives us a good sample size to look at those who are directly treated. But the bigger sample out of the survey sample that I talked about, 4,160, the bigger sample, like 80% or so, they are actually those who are not directly treated, but in treated villages. So the idea is to then assess that spillover, see how they are affected. So the same outcomes that we are testing for directly treated, we also have a random sample of those who are not directly treated, and we also assess the same outcomes.
And finally, I think there is, perhaps as Emilia was referring to at some point, either through models or through, I mean, the incentives of the agrovets is a very interesting dilemma here, where in some way we understand that they could like, I mean, if people are buying the old ones, as long as they're buying, we're fine. But there is maybe in some places there's more competition. So if I don't promote, if I know that the new ones are better, at some point I want to be able to, if my seeds are better than the ones of the other agrovets, then people will come more to me. So maybe there should be some, at least some forces that would push people, if there is competition, some forces that would push people towards promoting better seeds. But not enough if people are completely unaware of which seed is better, and it has some costs to actually making people use and learn the better ones. But there is sort of some non-standard IO, like a competition story here that could be really interesting and could deserve some either modeling and or really understanding like the incentives of the agrovets. And I think it's super interesting, and you should have rich data to be able to dig further into this. And we're reaching the end of the time.
Promote, we actually have an RCT where we look at the effect of new agrovets, randomly 1 acre funds, new agrovets. We randomize their entry into different markets, and we look at the effect on seed and fertilizer quality and price and other characteristics of the market. So maybe we should come back and present that work in another webinar. But it's very related to that question that you raised, Rashid, about the IO of these markets and sort of incentives of everyone participating. So anyway, thanks so much.
Yeah, and we also see it coming up even among our agro dealers. So they care about their reputation. So they care about farmers coming back. So they're not, at least not all of them will just push out a variety because they received an incentive. That's from my own observation with these agro dealers. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. It's a wonderful work. I think it's super promising. So.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much
for the participation. Thanks, Michael and Sarah, for all the hard work behind this and for sharing. And Emilia, thank you for the super insightful comments.